You're in the right place. Hello, I'm Dan Harris.
Hi, and I'm Claudia Koestler.
You're over here, over there.
Hello, and welcome back to Over Here, Over There, your podcast across borders, where we delve into the most pressing events and topics and their worldwide implications. I'm your host, Claudia Koestler.
And I'm Dan Harris.
And today we have a fascinating episode lined up. We'll be exploring the recent UK election results and their potential ripple effects across the globe, how they might influence the upcoming US elections, and what lessons can be drawn from similar recent elections across Europe. Dan, you have been there at the polling station in the UK. Could you start by giving us your perspective on the outcome?
Yes, in fact, I had my picture taken at the polling station outside, which I'm very proud of, which I'm glad I had done. But, first, as a lesson to those who are doubting democracy around the world, it shows that democracy actually works. And there was a seamless transition of power between the Conservatives and Labour. And so it happened and it went off without a hitch. So does the democracy here in the UK need improving? Sure it does, and we'll talk about that. But it works, and so it's a good example to the rest of the world, I thought. But let's state the obvious here. The polls were generally right, and Labour won in a landslide. Under its new leader and now Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer, Labour's in a powerful position with 412 seats out of 650, almost like the second highest that's ever achieved. I think a little bit more under the Blair government in 1997. The Conservatives had a disastrous performance, losing 252 seats, the most in their history. And that said, because of the first past-the-post system in this parliamentary democracy here in the UK, Labour actually didn't increase its vote share very much, only by 1.7%, but gained all those seats. The Tories dropped, though, by about 20%, which is very close to what the polls predicted. So, but why did this happen? Well, it's been building. It's been building because they had a resounding win in just 2019. So what went disastrously wrong since that time? Well, it really is like the inability of the Conservative Party to govern effectively and competently. The country is still feeling the effects of Brexit and the combination of the pandemic, the economy, which is starting to recover, but the scandals surrounding Boris Johnson, the ineptitude of the nanosecond premiership of Liz Truss, and let's just call it
the lettuce.
Let's just call it, yeah, the lettuce head. Exactly. How long will Liz Truss premiership last? Longer than a lettuce or not? So I think the lettuce won. But then they had Rishi Sunak's lack of political skill in moving his party further to the right, which didn't help, especially on immigration. So it was a wide open goal for Keir Starmer, and it was just a tap-in for him. And the polls were just about right for the most part. A few wrong moves on as far as the exit polls for the Reform Party, which we can get into. But on the whole, they were pretty well accurate as far as judging that this was going to be a landslide. And now he's got tremendous power. This is Starmer's tremendous power to set his own agenda, which we'll see what happens.
Well, you mentioned it. It is a landslide for Labour. Now they are in power, so they have to deliver. What do you think will the UK government deliver on?
Well, there's very little time for a honeymoon period. To be honest, Starmer has got to show leadership immediately on the cost of living. And it's an issue that a lot of Western democracies are facing now. He's got very little room to maneuver given the state of the economy, but we'll see how he slaloms through that. One of his first acts will be to stop the Rwanda policy of shipping refugees to that country at an exorbitant cost, which many across the political spectrum thought to be ineffective and rather barbaric. So that's his first act, which I think won't see much resistance. But there's a lot ahead as far as, one, the economy, the NHS, social care, education, you name it. So there's so many issues in his in tray, and he made a point in his speech to say, the work starts now. He wants to show the country that he's on it and he's capable.
Well, you mentioned before that the Tories had a major defeat, and as you mentioned before, the landslide for the Labour Party. How will the political landscape in the UK shift following these results?
Well, we talked about the shift in just at the top of the food chain, let's call it that, with the Labour taking over and taking a big part of the seats in the House of Commons. But the other big story of the night is about the rise of third parties. It's very significant. The moderate Liberal Democrats Party gained 71 seats, and that's up from 8. They were at 8, and they gained 71 seats. And then the newly formed Reform Party under Nigel Farage, who used to be called in its previous incarnations like the UKIP party, which didn't really fare that well, but gained some votes in the popularity contest, but never seated anybody in parliament, as far as I can remember. But the newly formed Reform Party gained 5 seats, which was much at the expense of the Conservatives. So the telling thing in this election, which
So
really
there
points,
is a little bit of a shift to the right.
it is a shift to the right.
Sorry to
No,
interrupt
no,
you.
no. It is a shift to the right. And so it really puts on the map, really. When you get the Reform Party in Parliament, that is a big deal. Even one member, when you break the ice like that, like the Greens did. And the Greens have had one member of Parliament for a while, but now that put them on the map. And people would have to pay attention to them because they had a member of Parliament. But to have 5 and one go at their first go is significant. And they did that at the expense of the Conservatives. But what we talked about democracy and how it was good to see a peaceful transition and as a show of how elections can be run without any abuse of power or things like that. The system, though, still needs looking at because when you look at the vote share, that the Reform Party got 5 seats while winning 14.3%, over 4 million votes, while the Liberal Democrats amassed 71 seats and they had a 12.2% vote share. Now, go figure. Now, that is that. Now, you can just scratch your head and say, is that the right way to run a democracy? There's a lot more talk about proportional representation and things like that as far as getting closer to a more ideal of what a democratic election should look like.
That, to me, sounds quite surprising what you have just mentioned with the percentage and the actual seats. Has that surprised you the most in the election campaign, or was something else more surprising even than that?
The surprise was Liberal Democrats doing so well. And I think that what they really did and Labour did, those two parties did really, really well, was they understood the system this time better than other elections. And they put their campaign funds in seats they thought they could win. They weren't going to run up the numbers just to pad out the vote share. They wanted to win the seats. So they spent their campaign pounds on winning seats. And that's what they did. And of course, the general trends were against the Conservatives, and reform came into the picture, made it even worse for them. So the surprises were, I think, the rise of the Liberal Democrats to 71 seats and the reform getting on the map as they did with 5 seats. Now, let me just say, if they had a fairer system of distribution of seats, that you could actually look at reform winning about 90 seats with the vote share that they got. But because of the way the voting map across the UK is more spread out and diverse, and so they amassed just 5. So it needs serious looking at.
So given the results that we have now, do you think that the UK is going to lead the way to a more moderate politics, or will it, with the recent elections in Germany and France in mind, stand alone in the next years?
And you can add Italy and Netherlands and others to that rightward shift, of course. And the answer is yes. I think the UK is a bit of an outlier in that regard, along with France after the left's strong showing in the second round of the election. It'll be interesting to see how Keir Starmer deals with the EU when these right-wing governments and movements are becoming more prominent. Perhaps this will actually, provide a more conciliatory approach by the EU in negotiations with the UK if the UK is seeking a closer relationship. So that's going to be interesting because Keir Starmer has said he's going to go back to Europe and get a better trade relationship, hopefully, which will help the economy. So in those negotiations, maybe they'll look a little bit more kindly towards the UK, given that it's a moderate centrist government in power now.
So you do think that it will impact the country's role in Europe and towards the European Parliament and gain a little bit more of a mutual understanding and probably, hopefully, a trade deal or something like that. I mean, there still are Brexit implications that need to be remedied, don't they?
Yeah, exactly. Because, I mean, the UK has got to get a better trading relationship with the EU. Full stop. It's its biggest trading partner and it has to improve its economy and in other aspects. So if you want to grow the UK economy and fund government policies, you have to do this. Starmer has little room to maneuver with the budget he has now for his spending program. So something has to be done. It's pretty clear to me this is all connected. During the election, not much was said about Brexit because it's still a hot issue, but it was just under the covers of the debate because they knew it was such a hotbed issue that they didn't want to disturb the horses in a sense on one side or the other of the argument. So Keir Starmer actually just kept it rather quiet and just went ahead. And we're all reading through the tea leaves as to what he's going to do with negotiations with the EU. And number one thing is it's got to improve.
Speaking of connections, with both the UK and the US having crucial elections within a short span of each other, do you think the UK result will somehow influence the upcoming US election? And if so, how?
The short answer is no. Even though there's a special relationship between the two countries, so-called, I think it's more special on this side than it is on the other side. But they still have a very, very tight bond between the two countries, culturally, politically, everything else. But the U.S. has a different problem, which it's worried about, and that's the existential threat to its democracy in the form of Donald Trump, which most British and Europeans are very concerned about. They will be heartened by the fact that a moderate Labour government is in power here. That will give them some encouragement. But on the whole, across America, no country will really influence them so much. They look at this as a fight between existential threat on the right versus a pro-democracy government on the other side.
So you don't see that there are any parallels that American political parties should or could draw from the UK experience?
Well, number one, democracy works, and it is possible for a leftist center government to win by such a huge seat majority. But I don't think it'll impact the U.S. election in a significant way. It's a bit of a morale boost, though, to the Democrats who are trying to stop an authoritarian MAGA movement.
Now that Sir Keir Starmer is Prime Minister, how will he deal with a possible President Trump, or how will he deal with a President Biden? How will it differ?
If he has to deal with a President Trump, he'll emphasize the importance of a state-to-state relationship. Starmer will be wary of dealing with a volatile and unpredictable ally, and it definitely be a challenge to his statecraft and statesmanship. The special relationship, which I mentioned, didn't seem that special under Trump, and for that matter, Biden, both of whom were in no hurry to do a trade deal with the UK after Brexit. So I don't see that changing much, regardless of who's president as after November.
To sum up, is the UK showing the world the way?
The world respects the UK, that's for sure, with all its history and traditions and soft and hard power. It'll depend on how active and engaged the new government plans to be on the world stage and how much it values its relationships, bilateral and multilateral, which by all indications, Starmer seems to do. I think the UK has a lot of work ahead in determining its own objectives and how it relates to the world. But for now, it'll be done through a lens of a moderate Labour government, which will be certainly a change of what we've had over the last 5 to 10 years.
Thank you so much, Dan. That has been quite insightful. Thank you very much. And before we close, we'd like to remind our listeners that they can subscribe to our podcast by the button below. Over Here, Over There can be found on most major podcast platforms. You can also follow us on social media. And don't forget to add your likes to today's episode, please. And today's podcast show notes can be found on our website, overhereoverthere.org. If you want to be a patron, we have a button for that too on our website, and we'd very much appreciate your support. Polite, insightful, humorous, and constructive comments are also very welcome in any language, so please be in touch.
And as a special treat, we're going to play our intro and outro, the full song of 10% by the Pleasure Bombs about democracy and can you increase it by 10%.
Check out our website for our next unmissable podcast. Until then, thank you for listening to Over Here, Over There.
Thinking about the money the government's found, thinking about trying to pay the round, thinking about the sound of a sweet accent, thinking about the way the words get found, thinking about the things my mother said, thinking about painting my politics round, thinking about a song called Fred This Down, thinking about the gun inside of my head. Can you increase democracy by 10%? Can you increase democracy by 10%? Thinking about a nun in a cool convent, thinking about the dope that my best friend sent, thinking about the hope and where it went, thinking about the trouble that we just had, thinking about climbing back into my bed, thinking about the time when my tie got bled, thinking about the gun inside of my head. Democracy by 10%. Can you increase democracy by 10%? Can you increase democracy by 10%?
That's right.
Can you increase democracy by 10%? About the things my mother said, thinking about beating my politics round, thinking about a song called Fred This Down, thinking about the gun inside of my head.